let's go back to the story. We have had some discussion about Lot's daughters here. So anyway, we did forget to mention that, I forgot to mention Lot's wife, but I assume we all know the story, but just it's important to mention that she looked back. Now, Lot was trying to secure a place for him to go. Perhaps he didn't want to start over. Perhaps he was afraid that he would see what was happening, but there's a good chance that wherever he went, mountains or not, he would have seen what happened. But he wasn't supposed to look, so that ends that, right? The other thing we were discussing was with regard to his wife who looked back, and it's a picture Jesus again uses for us not to hold on to our lives, to hold on to our stuff. When we see the abomination of desolation, he says, get out of Jerusalem. Remember, now don't go down to get your coat and so on. Remember Lot's wife. So we're living in those days where we can't afford to take the time or to be connected that much to our life that we can't drop it. So the picture is that we need to be totally given to God in our life. We don't hold on to our own wants and desires, and that's what's meant by holding on to our life. We will lose it if we do. We will be like Lot's wife, who instantly turned into a pillar of salt. Okay? Wasn't the best way to go out, for sure. The other thing that we see, and we discussed this a little bit during the break, so we're going to go back to it. We see clearly that Lot's daughters had some problems. But the text does say that Lot did not know or was not aware of what was happening. So we can't argue with that. It's hard for us to understand how he could not know, but the text does say that. So he must have been very out of it. That's all we can say. The second part is, how did his daughters come up with this whole plan? Remember, they did live in Sodom, and they did see this kind of stuff on a regular basis, right? So there's two issues here. One, I think there's some truth to the fact that they wanted to have kids, because all women at those times wanted kids. That was what life was about. Today, teenagers, they want a car, they want, whatever teenagers want today. We won't get into it. But in those days, they wanted a baby. That was the epitome of fulfillment for a woman in those days. Right? Made her special, made her important. Second thing is, they probably were curious, because they did live in Sodom. So, and maybe they saw this kind of thing on a regular basis. Say, well, it's incest. Yeah, but maybe they saw that kind of thing. We're dealing with Sodom, which was extremely wicked. Right? So God's mercy was given to them regardless of what they did. So obviously he knew their hearts. And somebody pointed out something good did come out of Moab. That was Ruth, who became in the Messianic line. So we affirm that no matter how bad things are, God can do great things and can choose people out of incredible places, circumstances. Amen? All right, so we had that little discussion. I wanted to fill it in for the sake of the tape. Let's go back now to where we were with Ishmael and Isaac. Okay? Isaac is now weaned, and Abraham had a big party. And then trouble develops in the household. Right? Sarah was, this is verse 9, Sarah was the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham. She was mocking, right? Sarah was being mocked by Hagar. Therefore she said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with the son of Isaac. My son Isaac, The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son, But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her. For through Isaac your descendants shall be named. So now Abraham is suffering some of the consequences of his bad decision, right? And Sarah as well. And one could say that Abraham was somewhat forced into having a concubine, having a second wife. It wasn't his way of looking at things. He obviously has a godly view of marriage and does not believe in having more than one wife, but in this case, he is convinced that it is necessary for God's plan. So he's kind of coerced into it. That's not making an excuse, but one of the things we do see and will see as we go on, the godly seed continues to value marriage, whereas the other side sees nothing wrong with polygamy and goes after polygamy. Okay? And it slowly begins to infiltrate even the godly seed, to the point where Jesus said, it wasn't so in the beginning, but because of hardness of heart, these things happened. Right? And we see here, anyway, so, and the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. Today, in Hebrew, it's Beersheba. And it literally means, as we're going to find out soon, the well of the oath. Yes, or 7. It can also be 7. 7 wells. Because Sheva is 7. It also means oath. Okay? So, Abraham sent out Ishmael. And we see that in the book of Galatians, Paul uses this story, this analogy, to show how Ishmael and Hagar represent the fleshly attempt at righteousness, the legalism, right? And how Abraham and Isaac and Sarah represent the God's plan, God's righteousness, and how the legalism and God's righteousness can't dwell together, because one is the product of the flesh, the other is from God, and the two will be at enmity. The sins of the flesh, the deeds of the flesh versus the deeds of the Spirit. You understand? So he uses that whole analogy in Galatians chapter 5, I think. 4 and 5. And he uses this, and people twist it and misunderstand it. But he is simply saying, using this story as a kind of a midrash or an allegory to explain the conflict that exists between the work of the flesh and the work of the Spirit. Legalism, which is the work of the flesh, trying to be righteous by my own effort versus accepting God's righteousness through faith. And Hagar and Ishmael represent trying to be righteous, make God's work happen by my own efforts. Right? Whereas Isaac and Sarah is God's sovereign choice, God's grace through faith, receiving the promise. Sarah was supernaturally, if you would, although it was her husband, obviously, who was the father, it was supernatural what happened with her, because 90-year-old women don't give birth. So this was an amazing. And we find that always when it has to do with the seed, we see this happening over and over when it comes to bringing forth the Messianic seed. Amen? And God intervenes and demonstrates His power and His promise and does what is impossible in the natural. And so this is a perfect picture of why we can't live with the deeds of the flesh and with legalism can't be part of our lives. It has to be driven out. So drive out the bond woman and the son of the bondwoman, because the son of the bondwoman, the son of the slave, can't inherit with the son of the free woman. That's Paul's picture in Galatians. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, it's just a story. He's just taking the story and illustrating with it. He is not saying that God has rejected Ishmael or anything like that. That's not the point. All right? Because God does bless Ishmael and gives him 12 sons, just like he gave Jacob 12 sons. Right? So he had a chance to live for God and please God. Now we need to understand all the descendants of Abraham. Abraham saw all of his children as important. He didn't just see Isaac as the only thing that mattered. He trained all his kids. They were all taught at the same values, the same truth of God's word. But some of them wanted God's ways and some of them didn't. Right? So later on when we find people that are godly still in the Middle East, like, what's his name? Jethro's, Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, who was from Midian. Midian was originally one of Abraham's sons. So there's a godly line there. Coming through Abraham, there's still people in Middle East at the time of the Exodus that are still trying to follow God based on their teaching from Abraham. Okay, so we mustn't forget that. We'll go into that a little more as we go along. All right. Because we tend to think, okay, Isaac's the only godly person now and everybody else is rejected. That's not so. They were not the called, they weren't the children of promise. They were the seed. The messianic seed wasn't going to come through them. The salvation of the world wasn't going to come through them. But they still had a responsibility to walk with God and to be righteous. They're still children of Abraham. And they got an education in the things of God, which they should have walked in. And they will be held accountable for that. Now, Lot's sons, of course, became complete heathen and married Canaanites. And we saw the result, right? Later on, we'll see how those two nations are completely pagan and heathen and don't know God. So it was very important for them to not marry into the Canaanites. That was very important because of the godlessness of the Canaanites. All right, so now, how about this picture? That is Abraham's well. Okay? So Abraham made a covenant with Abimelech. We just went through that story. And it came about that after that time, verse 22, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you all in all that you do. Now therefore, swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my offspring, or with my posterity, but according to the kindness that I have shown to you, you shall show to me and to the land in which you have sojourned. Sojourned means lived. He didn't live there permanently. He just kind of visited and kind of, hung out there, right? So he kind of squatted there, if you would. That would be our term. But sojourned. Again, Abraham lived in several different places. He seemed to like Hebron a lot, the oaks of Mamre. I can understand. It's so hot, the oaks must have been very refreshing, right? But also he lived in Beersheba. And here, he makes the covenant, the oath, right? Which, of course, is why it's called Beersheba, the well of the oath. Or the 7 wells is another interpretation. But I think the biblical one is the well of the oath, where he swore with Abimelech. And then Isaac came along and in the same place, at the same wells, made a covenant again, another covenant. Right? Because Abimelech, apparently it doesn't seem to be him, but his servants, the Philistines, the ancestors of the Philistines, well, they were still called the Philistines, were not following the rules. And they were trying to steal the wells and so on, and stopping them up and going to war with Abraham. And it appears that Abimelech was a good guy who didn't want that to happen. Seemed to be a man of his word, and Abraham and he were friends. Okay, so Abraham said, verse 24, I swear it, but Abraham complained to Abimelech because of the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor did I hear of it until today. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs, so that's where the 7 comes in, right, of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what do these 7 ewe lambs mean, which you have set by themselves? He said, you shall take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, so that it may be a witness to me that I dug this well. Therefore he called that place Beersheba, or Beersheba in English, because there the two of them took an oath, right, by the well of the oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba, and Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the army, arose and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba. I can't call it anything but Beersheba because I've been there for 12 years. I've been going there. And that's what they call it, right? And there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days. Now Gerar is not that far away from Beersheba, if you're wondering about these places. So he has a pretty big camp. I mean, lots of animals and so forth. So it appeared that his animals are spread out. And maybe even this is where the wells come in. The wells are very important with animals. And they're in the desert. Okay? Today, when you travel from Beersheba, you go on a little bit and you'll see signs for Gerar. So the name is still there. And also Mamre, which is Hebron today, is not that far from Beersheba to the east. Gerar is to the west. Does that make sense? So he seemed to have gone back and forth between Beersheba and Hebron a lot. Kind of stay in different places. You got to remember, his flock is pretty big. All of his property is big. So maybe he was grazing sheep or whatever in different places. Kind of like what farmers do, you know. I know some farmers. I grew up on a farm. I know some big farmers. That's what they do. They have land somewhere else and they go there and they take care of the animals there. But in those days, they would go there and stay for a while. So because he was in a tent, he would move around like that. He might stay in a place for years and then he wanted to go the other place. Right? Okay, so that is one of the wells which they believe may very well be Abram's well. There's another one that is in Tel Beersheba, the original place, where there was an actual city later on. And there's a well there which is, I think, 70 feet, they said. And it's full of water. And I dropped something in there, and I waited until it hit. You could hear it. So it's amazing. And they dug those by hand and built them. Or they obviously built the walls of them and everything. So it was a big deal. When he's talking about a well, this is a big deal. They put a lot of effort into this well, and to have somebody steal it or stop it up is worth fighting over. Right? So when you read about the wells, you wonder, what's the big deal? But that was extremely important. And without the water, they couldn't have their animals. The animals would die, and they would die eventually without the water. Right? All right. That's that. So let's go on. All right. So Ishmael is out, and God has spoken to Ishmael, and he's living out now in the desert somewhere. right? It appears, we'll hear more about that later. Anyway, chapter 22. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you. Now this is a pretty amazing story. Just for a second here, I want to mention some, the Jasher and Jubilees have these stories. Some of them seem quite plausible, some of the extra bits. So those I bring in. Anything that seems far-fetched, I leave out. But if it's, a lot of it has to be true. We know that because they're ancient books. And they did have have some biblical respect, should we say. So there's definitely something to these stories. All right, but they were left out of the Bible because they're not Scripture. But one of the things here is that there is this story that actually this was kind of like what happened to Job. Okay, the story how Satan pressed God to test Abraham. That's one of the stories. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's possible. Okay? So, he's a great guy and everything, but, will he give everything? Will he go all the way? So that might have happened. There's, it's possible, right? But anyway, Abraham gets the ultimate test. And I think it has more to do with the covenant than anything else. Because God is has made a covenant with this man, and now it has to do with his seed, right? Which we know to be the Messiah, who ultimately will make this sacrifice. So there's got to be, this is one of the most significant things in the Hebrew understanding of Scripture, and certainly in our understanding as well. This is called the Akedah, and it's this whole offering up of Isaac, which was a type. Isaac is a type of Messiah. Okay? Now, so the story goes that he had to leave home, and this is a bit of a trek, and you know how attached what's her name? Sarah, thank you. How attached Sarah is to her son, her only son. See, he's her only son, right? And in a sense, he's Abraham's only son also when it comes to the covenant, right? And so now God says to him, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah, see? And I think those words are significant because ultimately Jesus, the only Son of God, the one and only begotten, is offered on the same place. Carries the wood up on the mountain just like Isaac carried the wood. Right? And it says, there is this story that somehow that they all knew, and I think that's probably likely, that not only Isaac was not like, brain dead through this whole process, that he knew what was going on. And there was an entourage that went with Abraham to Moriah, and he bade them stay there, and he went on with Isaac. And Isaac is carrying the wood, and he asks his father, where's the sacrifice? Right? Let's just read it. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and rose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his young man, stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go over there, and we will worship and return to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So the two of them walked on together. Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering." So this is Abraham prophesying that God's going to provide. Now, Abraham fully understands that he is intending to offer his son in obedience to God. And it is an incredible story because he does not waver. Now, some sources hint that Sarah had some idea what was going on here. It's very possible. Because, they didn't have a lot of distractions in those days. So they were very tuned in to what people were thinking, what their family members was going on with them. So Abraham has to be pretty under it as he leaves the house here. And so Sarah knows where he's going, most likely. Okay, she may not fully understand what's happening, what he's going to do, but she knows something's up. And her only son is leaving her. Right? And so she's probably traumatized. But anyway, it's amazing the obedience that he has. And Isaac does not put up any fight or anything, even though he knows he's being laid on the altar. And he's about to be slain. And a burnt offering. He knows this. After Abraham obviously gives him the answer, when he starts, tying him to the wood, I think you would think he would figure it out, right? Of course he did. But yet he totally submits to the will of God. In fact, again, I hate to use extra biblical sources so much, but they do kind of fill in a little bit of the gaps, all right? They say that Abraham was weeping and Isaac was weeping, but both of them were ready to do the will of God. That's some of the fill-in. I'd say that's probably true, wouldn't you? To think that Abraham wasn't having emotion here is really ridiculous. So I like that because it helps us to understand. But yet they knew their hearts were doing the right thing, but their flesh was saying, this is terrible, we can't do this. Right? But it was the ultimate test, wasn't it? So Abraham stretched out his hand. So it's important to see that Isaac was voluntarily involved as well. That's important because he could be screaming and yelling and saying, "Get me off of here." He wasn't. Remember, he's a teenager. He's old enough to know what's going on here. He's not a little kid. But the angel of the Lord, just as he was about to stretch out his hand, you know the story, the angel of the Lord stopped him and said, "Abraham, Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Then Abraham raised his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the place of his son. So God will provide the lamb. God provides the lamb, who is the son, the only Son of God. And it said, on the mount of the Lord it is provided. Right? In the mount of the Lord, verse 14, it will be provided. And that apparently became a proverb or a saying. The other thing that's important to see, actually that was the name of the place, right? It's important to see that, okay, it'll come back to me. Let's just keep going. I forgot what it was about. Oh, yes. Promise number 7. The promise is spoken again, and this is the 7th time right here. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Indeed, I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heaven, as the sand which is on the seashore. Right? Same promise again. And your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies, and in your seed, the Messiah, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. And how important is it for this promise to be reiterated again at this point, at this time? Right? So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. All right. The other thing I want to point out, by the way, there are some things in this book which I have not referred to at all. But anyway, the offering of Isaac, I've pretty much covered everything here, right? This is the part I wanted to mention. In Jewish tradition, the horns of the ram, which were tangled in the thicket, were symbolic of the deliverance of the Jewish people from trouble. It is for this reason that the shofar is used as a trumpet. The ram's horn, right, which is caught in the thicket, sounding the deliverance of the Israelites. In particular, the one horn of the ram symbolized the Israelites' deliverance from Egypt. The second, referred to by Paul as the last trump, will be sounded in the day of the Lord, signifying the deliverance of the last remnant of Jews. Okay? So that's an important piece of information, because when you hear Paul talk about the last trump, people get very confused as to what that is. And many think it's the last trump in the book of Revelation, because there's 7 trumpets. It has nothing to do with that, because those trumpets were not known about at the time Paul said the last trump. That John didn't bring that word until 95 AD, right? So this is what he's referring to. All right. And we know, of course, that Ishmael's descendants continue to be at war with Israel, with Abraham's son of the promise, right? All right. Let's go on then. Nahor's children are mentioned here, and there's a reason. We're told that Nahor is having some kids, and we're told about how many he has, right? And it came about after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah also has borne children to your brother Nahor, Uz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and so on, and all the different names. I think there's a total of 12, right? Interesting number, huh? So 12, of course, is representative of, it's a representative number of perfect government. The nation, Israel, has 12 tribes. Even Ishmael has 12 sons, right? And here, Nahor has 12 also. All right. Now, another big event. How are we doing? Okay? Is this the way we're doing it? Okay? We're just reading it and commenting? Okay. So we don't want to miss anything. Sarah lived 127 years, and then she died, right? And these were the years of the life of Sarah. Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron. And this, by the way, is Hebron today, the cave of the patriarchs. You may have heard of it, where they're all buried. We're going to read about that right now. There's constantly struggles there because it's one of the places where Jews go and also Muslims go, and they fight over it all the time. And they try to close it, shut it down to the Jews. And so anyway, it's one of those places of tension. But that's because it's the burial place of Abraham and Sarah and Jacob and Isaac and Rebekah, right? Okay. Then Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, If I am a stranger and a sojourner among you, give me a burial site among you that I may bury my dead. So he goes back and forth with the sons of Heth, and finally they agree to let him buy it off them. And he buys the whole field, right? The cave and the field and everything is given over to Abraham. And it says, they want to give it to him, but Abraham won't take it without paying for it. And you understand why, because people say things, but then somebody comes along and says, yeah, you don't own it. Their kids come along, right? So Abraham weighed out to Ephron the silver which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth. He wanted witnesses as well, right? 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. How about that? So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, is the cave of Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and cave which was in it, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of his border were deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Heth. Very important piece of information. Still there today. Places like that. I'd love to go there, but it's kind of dangerous. Hebron's not a good place to go to right now. Chapter 24. Now we come to the story of the bride that's chosen for Isaac. Now, this is really important. Obviously, Abraham wants to get this matter settled. It's very important to him. Obviously, he has been told, right, been passed on through the godly seed from Noah, right on down through Shem. Abraham knows that his son Isaac cannot marry a Canaanite. That's not going to happen. He has to find somebody from his own family that he can. And believe me, it matters who you marry. It matters. In this case, it would have, if Isaac had married a Canaanite, he would have forfeited the promise, most likely. This was very important. So it's very important. And now, later on, we see that the ones who took God seriously and loved God and loved his ways took this seriously. The ones who didn't married Canaanites, like Esau. So we're going to learn about Esau. There was a lot of reasons why Esau was rejected. Right? We'll get there in a few minutes. But anyway, Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live. But you will go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. The servant said to him, suppose the woman is not willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? Then Abraham said to him, beware that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from so he can't go back there either, to Chaldea, right? The Lord took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this my oath. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. All right, so why did he put his hand under his thigh? Well, by the way, that's, kind of next to his privates, okay? And that's the point. Believe it or not. It was swearing on his seed, his posterity. They were essentially witnesses. That was the thinking. Also, of course, in Abraham's case, the circumcision is the covenant and all that. But that doesn't seem to be what this is about. This is an ancient custom. And by the way, it was also used in other cultures. In Rome, it appears to have been a custom as well. Did you know that the word testify comes from the Latin testes? Did you know that? It's a fact. Which testicles is the word testicles. So that's where the word testify comes from. Yes, lots of funny things in the Bible. But it's a fact. So they were swearing by his posterity, his seed, his, so in those days, and it should be, of course, the same today, but it's not. Integrity was something that, you passed on, right? Your integrity is as a way of saying, my descendants will honor this covenant, and these two men are making this agreement that it's going to be carried out, right? So it's how they took an oath. And it's funny that that's what the word testify, that's where it comes from. When you hear it, you'll think differently next time you hear it. All right. And that, by the way, comes from secular sources. Okay. All right. So they took their swearing very seriously. When they took an oath, they meant it. It was usually, it was a very serious and somber thing. And they expected God would hold you accountable, and their witnesses would hold you accountable. And the seed, posterity of the person would hold you accountable. And they did that, didn't they? They would later on, like Solomon, for instance, fulfilled some of the promises of David. For the enemies of David, he held them accountable for what they had done during David's time. All right, that's that. How are we doing? 8:30. Okay. Then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master. This is a great story. And it's actually a picture. Have you read the book? It's a picture, really, of the choosing of the bride of Messiah. You might not have made that connection, but Abraham represents God the Father, who sends his trusted servant, the Holy Spirit, to find a bride for his son. Nonetheless, Abram's faith and his godly fathering are highlighted in this account and are the reason he was chosen by God. Abraham knew that the choice of a bride was something that would make or break his sons, and cause them to succeed or fail. Therefore, he sent his servant to the house of his father to find a wife for his son. What follows is a wonderful story of God's direction and provision, as the servant's prayers are answered and God brings Isaac the perfect choice for his mate. Amen? So we won't read it all. We'll just talk about the story. He goes, right, and he kind of prays to the Lord. He lays out a fleece, so to speak. This is where he had to go. He went all the way to Haran, way up there. And it's actually in Turkey today. And that's where Abraham's family was, right? And I believe that's why they have listed Nahor's family members just prior to this. Because Moses is telling us, where these people that he had kids, right? Now, that's where he's going to find a wife for Isaac. So he took the camels, off he went, and he prayed to the Lord as he went to the well where they were watering camels, and he prayed that the woman who came, if she offered him a drink, I think, right, and then offered to water his camels as well, which obviously was a big deal, that would be the one. That would be a sign to him. So it was kind of like he asked the Lord for a sign, right? And you know what happened? That's what happened. Rebecca came, and she gave him a drink, right? And she offered to water all his camels as well. Now, why did he have so many? Well, obviously he had a bunch of people with him, because apparently when you traveled in those days, you needed people with you. You wouldn't go alone, because you might be attacked or ambushed or whatever, right? You had to have a sort of a entourage with you to protect you and all your belongings. He's obviously bringing gifts and all kinds of things. Okay, so he made his camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. He said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me this success today and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now, may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And so that's exactly what happened. God answered his prayer, right? And before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who is born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, who has been mentioned already, right? One of the children, the wife of Abram's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. The girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had had relations with her. And she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. The servants ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. So I'm not going to go on into the story, but anyway, it's beautiful. They end up going to the house, right? The man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrist weighing 10 shekels in gold. She's liking that. And said, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? Now, what's the chances of him bumping right into her? This is a God thing, right? It's totally ordained by the Lord. Does God do that today? Yes, he does. So if there's anyone looking for a wife, this is a good prayer to pray. Right? God will show you. Amen? He's actively involved in that today, and I believe that the choice of a wife or a husband is, next to choosing Jesus as your Savior and Lord, is the most important decision you'll ever make. It will determine what happens to you in a lot of ways, whether you'll follow God or not, or do God's will or not, or be hindered or be blessed. Amen? So it's very important for people to cry out to God and ask for his direction. But sadly, a lot of even Christians don't do it, do they? They just kind of wander into relationships and do it the way the world does it. But I've seen it done God's way, and it's really good. Amen? Okay, so anyway, then the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. Now Laban was a piece of work. When he saw the ring and the bracelets on her sister's wrists, and when he heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, saying, this is what the man said to me, he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. And he said, come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I have prepared the house and a place for the camels? So the man entered the house, and Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels, and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, I will not eat until I have told my business. So he told them the whole story about what God had said to him, how he prayed, and how God had answered, right? And then Laban and his mother, is probably where he got it from, tried to coax him to stay longer. This was Laban's thing. He was always trying to get something out of it for himself. So, but the man said, no, I have to go. Don't hold me up. Don't keep me. So they said, Rebekah, are you willing to go? And she said, yes. So off they went. Amen? It's good stuff. Great story. Verse 60. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "May you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them." When Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man, so the servant took Rebekah and departed. Amen. Now, Isaac had come from going to Be'er Laharoi. Be'er Laharoi is probably what it is. Anyway, for he was living in the Negev, so he wasn't in Beersheba. And Be'er Laharoi, or Laharoi, was the place where Ishmael had lived for a while, or where God had spoken to, I think it was to Hagar, right? Yeah, that's where it was when they were out there. All right. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field. So obviously he's a man of God who takes the things of God seriously. And we learn from other sources that he actually went and spent 3 years with Shem in his house, learning the ways of God. So he is out in his field, and he's meditating on the Lord and meditating on his word, most likely. Right? On his promises. And then he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. She said to her servant, "Who is this man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself, because she didn't want him to see her right away, right? The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. That's an old custom. We still do that in weddings today. The bride comes in with the veil over her face, right? And then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent. That's, of course, how Jacob got deceived by the veil. We won't go there yet. That's coming up. Then the servant told Isaac all the things he had done, and Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So obviously, he was still grieving over his mother in some way, right? Because they were very, very close. So, this is a good story, amen? Now, God arranged this marriage, and it doesn't say that Isaac had to go through this big process of falling in love with her. He just chose to love her, and he fell in love with her right away, right? So when God is in it, all those things work out. Amen? It's not about feelings. I think it's about choices. The feelings come when you make the right choices. All right. Today it's all about feelings, of course. And that isn't the way it's supposed to be. All right. Then Abraham dies. But first, he starts a whole new life. Isn't that something? We learn in, what chapter are we at? Chapter 25. Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore to him Zimram, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian. There's Midian, right? And Ishbak, and Shua, and Jokshan became the father of Sheba and Dedan, which that's in Arabia, right? And the sons of Dedan were Ashurim, and Letushim, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, and Epher, and Hancock, and not John Hancock, a different guy, and Abidah, and Eldah. All these were the sons of Keturah. Now, Abraham, this is his third wife. But it appears that she is his concubine wife. Now, Sarah is dead. By this time, Hagar is also dead. But Abraham is taking another wife. But she's considered a concubine because nobody can take Sarah's place. Sarah was like it. She was God's choice for Abraham. Right? You follow? So he's legitimate wife. He only has one wife, but nonetheless, he's a widower, right? But nonetheless, they refer to her as a concubine. But when it says the children of his concubines, it's her and Hagar. Those are the only two. You follow? You get the impression when you read it that he had a whole bunch of other concubines. That's not the case. That's good, isn't it? It's an important point, because Abraham was true for the most part to the principle of one wife, except for the one mistake. But when you had relations with a woman in those days, you were married to her. And of course it should be that way today also, but it's not. But in that culture, you were responsible. Right? Okay, so he kind of got coerced into that, but you notice he has not changed his view. I've read this when I was a kid, and I thought, he's got all these concubines. What happened to Abraham? Because later on it says the children of his concubines. It says in verse 5, now Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines. Right? You think, oh, who did we not know about here? He's talking about Keturah and Hagar, Ishmael, and all these children sons that Keturah bore for him. They only got gifts from Abraham, who was quite wealthy. But everything he had went to Isaac. Isaac was the one who's God's promise. Now, Abraham took seriously, nations coming from him and having kids. And so he wasn't going to spend the rest of his life on his own, and he wanted to have more kids. And more power to him. He did. He didn't do anything wrong here. Okay? He's carrying on what God said. Have kids. Are you going to be a father of nations and you're not going to have kids? So he had more kids. Right? But he was very clear that Isaac was God's choice, and from Isaac was going to come the son, the Messiah, the Messianic line. Right? And the first Jacob, and then Israel as a nation. So God continues on that seed. But Abraham taught all these kids of his the ways of God. Did he not? Of course he did. They grew up in his house. They would know. Midian, now we know why Jethro still believed in God, even though he had some, stuff, right? But he was a believer in God Most High, because he was from the line of Abraham. Right? All right, let's go now to the descendants of Ishmael. They're listed. The next chapter 25, verses 12, starts at verse 12, and there's a list of all of Ishmael's sons, right, his descendants. And we know that down to verse 18, they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt. As one goes toward Assyria, he settled in the defiance of all his relatives. Now, this whole area was populated by sons of Shem. The Semites really are sons of Shem, but later on it became known as a term that was used exclusively of Jews, the sons of the promised one, right? Of Isaac and Jacob and so on. But initially they were sons of Shem. That's where we get the term Semite, Shem, from Shem. You got it? All right. So here we see that's essentially the land of Saudi Arabia today and Yemen. Okay, so that's where so we have Ishmael's descendants really were the Arabians, and are the Arabians. The Arabs today are descendants from Ishmael. Okay? And of course, Islam is built on this whole idea that Ishmael was the son of promise and not Isaac. So it's basically built on jealousy. And the enmity between them continues on to this day, because Ishmael never truly forgave Abraham or Isaac and held a grudge. Passed it on. Isn't it amazing? Passed it on to his descendants, even to this day. How the enemy uses those things. When you hold grudges, the devil gets in there and uses them, can pass them on to your children. All right. So these are the records of the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was barren. Now see, why does God do this? Why was Sarah was barren? The mother of nations. Now we have Rebekah again. Because there's a message, isn't there? What's the message? Well, you have to trust God. This comes from God. It's not just natural. Right? And so there's always the supernatural involved in the whole line of Messiah. It's amazing how God is teaching us that this is a supernatural work. So she has to pray. She has to cry out to God. And her husband has to cry out to God for her. Isaac prayed to the Lord. She told him to. On behalf of his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. So sometimes God doesn't make the promise. God gives us the promise, but he doesn't make them that easy for us sometimes. Right? It's almost like he puts little obstacles in the way. Does that make sense to you? It's like you have to want it bad enough to jump over the obstacle and to pray and ask God to move it. Right? And the Lord answered, and Rebekah conceived, but the children struggled together within her, and she said, If it is so, why then am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord. So apparently there was quite a war going on inside of her. And these, of course, ended up, these two nations, war. Even to this day, the descendants of Esau, which became the Edomites. Esau is the red guy, right? 2 nations are in your womb, the Lord said to her. 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So right from the very get-go, when they're in the womb, God tells Rebekah, and obviously Jacob knows this too, right? Not Jacob, Esau. Isaac, excuse me. Isaac knows this also, because his wife has this word from the Lord. Right? So how could he not know? There was no, she would tell him. I mean, they sat down at night. I'm sure she went on about it. What do you think? So it kind of, raises the question, why was Isaac so not in tune here? What was he missing that he was favoring Esau over Jacob? Right? So there's a bit of a problem there because God says right from the get-go that the older will serve the younger. The older is Esau, who is to serve Jacob. But Isaac, God has to switch things around because Isaac doesn't get with the plan. He lets his love for his son and he lets that interfere with God's plan. Right? Isaac was a very godly man, but he had this thing for Esau that he just loved the hunting and all that, and he just favored him. They both liked hunting, obviously, but Isaac wasn't a hunter, but he liked the game. He liked the venison. It was venison, apparently. Anyway, when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Now the first came forth red all over, like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau, which means red. Afterward his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel. This is prophetic, right? So his name was called Jacob, meaning supplanter. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. Okay. Starting off, 60 years old. Oh, yeah. But they were a little bit more fit than we are today. Right? When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a peaceful man. Note that. Living in tents. What does he mean, a peaceful man? See, Isaac was a bit of a rebel. Esau was a bit of a rebel right from the get-go. And all he wanted to do is hunt. And that's all he did. Right? He spent his time hunting game. So there's a lot of, he was a violent guy, obviously. Bit of a brawler. I'm not looking at anybody. But Jacob was a peaceful guy. But the thing that we don't hear here, but kind of get it in between the lines, is that Jacob was a man after God's purposes, but Esau wasn't. All right, we're told in, I think it's Jasher tells us that Jacob went to live with Shem for like 32 years. Okay, and it fits the narrative because he didn't really have kids till his 60s. So he went and spent a great deal of time learning the ways of God. Whereas Esau didn't want any part of it. Esau just wanted to hunt. He didn't know. Esau was ignorant. This is another, I remember your teaching on Esau. This, I don't know if you had this one in there, but Esau was ignorant. He didn't know anything about God's ways because he never put any effort into it. Right? And we'll see that in a minute. So Esau was out hunting. Now, he was hunting. He didn't just go out for the afternoon and come in. That's what we tend to think. Why is he saying he's famished? He went out for days at a time. Sometimes he went away for months. He camped out or whatever he did. This is how he's hunting. So he was out for a long time, obviously. And when he came back, he hadn't eaten in a while. So that's why he's, sounds like he's exaggerating things. But obviously he was pretty hungry and pretty worn out, maybe exhausted, right? But anyway, whatever happened, when Jacob came back, when Esau came home, and he had, it says because he had a taste for game, he loved Esau, Isaac. Do you see that? But Rebekah loved Jacob. Rebekah knew what God had said. Rebekah loved Jacob. We also find out from other sources that Abraham loved Jacob. I never knew this, but doing some research, and it makes perfect sense. When Abraham died, Jacob and Esau were 15, and they didn't live that far away. So where do you think they hung out? Do you think they spent time with Grandpa? Yeah, I think they did. And in fact, it tells us that Abraham loved Jacob, but didn't like Esau. And he would tell Rebekah all the time that Jacob was the guy, He's the guy that loves God. He's the right guy. So that's possible and likely. Abraham was a smart man, and he had his priorities right. And you can tell from kids, You really can. You can tell where their hearts are at. You can tell. And Esau apparently turned everybody off. He just didn't have any heart for the things of God. All right, now that's extra biblical, I know, but I'm inclined to think it's true. In fact, the story goes that when Abraham died, Jacob was laying on him, and Abraham was kissing him and hugging him, and that Abraham put his fingers on his eyes, put Jacob's fingers on his eyes, and put his hands over his head, and then just died. And that Jacob was actually asleep on his chest and didn't even realize he had died. That's the extra biblical story, but it's, we don't get a lot of that from the text, but you have to assume these people had lives and they had friendships and they spent time together. Right? I just love that because I think that so fits and gives me a lot of depth to the story because there's no question that Rebekah loved Jacob, and she didn't love him just because she was selfish. She remembered the prophecy. She understood that Jacob had a heart for the things of God, whereas Esau didn't. Jacob, I'm sorry, I keep mixing the names up here. Isaac was old and he was kind of, blind. He had an issue with his eyes. But he still, he knew the truth, but he seemed to favor, his oldest son. And of course, he probably comforted himself that the older is supposed to get it, even though he must have known the prophecy. Anyway, it's funny how Jacob comes along later and switches his arms with Joseph's sons, because he knows how God can turn things around, right? Anyway, so Esau comes home from the field, and he was famished, and Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I am famished." Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, "First sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is the birthright to me?" Oh my gosh. Now, this wasn't the blessing. This was his right to inherit the things of his father. And that included the cave and Machpelah and everything. Everything that his father had was supposed to go to the older son. But he got all that, and he sold it to him. Can you believe it? But I think Esau was just so unspiritual that he thought, well, I still get blessed. My dad will bless me, and things will be okay. So he figured that he's still going to be okay, I guess. He just obviously had a godless attitude and didn't value the things of God. Right? Now, who does that? Come on. Lots of people do it today, right? For different reasons. But if you think about what he did, it's pretty stupid. And nothing is unforgivable, obviously, with God, but it's kind of unforgivable. How could you do that? How could you give up everything your father is going to give you for a stupid meal? What's wrong with you, boy? He deserved a few slaps for that one. What do you think? But by this time, his character has developed, and it's not coming out good. It's important to see that. It wasn't just one thing. These were a series of choices in the life of Esau that have led him down the wrong path. Okay, and Jacob said, "First, swear to me." So he swore to him. So Jacob knows he's going to forget about this tomorrow, right? So he gets him to sign it, and paper, and everything. And he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So doing that was the same as hating it, giving it up so easily. Okay, chapter 26. We have another famine. Isn't it something? Abraham had a famine. Now there's another famine. Right? And Isaac moves and goes, there's Gerar right there. You see it? And he moves there. This is Beersheba here. So it's not that far away, but it's more west. So perhaps everything appears to be okay on the coast, which is interesting. So the famine is more in the desert areas, right? That's not surprising. See, Hebron is not that far either. It's just more northeast. See it? Anyway, so there was a famine in the land besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, and you know the story. The whole thing happens again with saying his wife is his sister. Like father, like son, right? So where did Isaac get this story from? His father, right? And so there's the whole deal with Abimelech, and he goes through it again. Now, some say that this Abimelech is actually the son of the previous one, that it's just a title that gets passed on to him, which is probably true, all right? Because he might be saying, what? Haven't we been through this? What's the deal here? But he doesn't seem to say that. He has to learn all over again, right? So we won't go into that, but you know that story, how pretty much works out the same. So Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold, verse 12. And the Lord blessed him, and the man became rich and continued to grow rich until he became very wealthy. For he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. Now all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines stopped up by filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are too powerful for us." And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. So apparently he went out probably more in the easterly direction rather than towards the coast. Okay? So he moved away from there. All right, so that's the story. Now, God is watching over Isaac the same way he watched over Abraham. And he tells the same little lie. Now, God doesn't confront him about it, but it just proves that these men were imperfect. They had issues. You know, everybody's got their little issues, right? But it appears that Rebecca was quite a beautiful lady also. How about that? So they're from the same stock, right? So she was quite beautiful also, so much so that Isaac said he's going to do what his father did because it worked for him. Right? So anyway, that's that story. It's just there. There's no commentary on it or anything. It's just there because the Bible just lays it out as it happened, right? But God doesn't comment on that. So then we have the whole deal with the well. Then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the same names which his father had given them. But when Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of flowing water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with the herdsmen of Isaac, right? Saying, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, because they contended with him. They dug, this is the same story, he's just giving us the details here. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too, so he named it Sitnah. He moved away from there, and they dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so he named it Rehoboth. For he said, "At last the Lord has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land." Then he went up from there to Beersheba. The Lord appeared to him in the same night and said, the promise again, right? So it's important to see that God affirms the covenant with Isaac and then affirms it again personally with Jacob. And then affirms it again with Israel in great, great detail. So nobody can say, well, they can, but nobody can legitimately say that it was any child of Abraham, but only these sons. Right? Okay, so he gave them the covenant. I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. So he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. All right, how are we doing? Okay, we're still hanging in there? All right. All right. Then Abimelech came to him from Gerar with his advisor, Huzzah, and Phicol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to them, "Why have you come to me, since you hate me and have sent me away from you?" They said, "We see plainly that the Lord has been with you." So he said, let there now be an oath between us. See, they want some of the blessing. Even between you and us, because they're catching on to the fact when Isaac was with them, they were getting blessed. Now that he's left, he's getting blessed and they're not doing so well, right? Let there now be an oath between us and between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you that you will do us no harm, just as we have not touched you or have done you nothing but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Lord. Then he made them a feast, and they ate and drank. In the morning they arose early and exchanged oaths. Then Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. Now it came about on the same day that Isaac's servants came in and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We have found water." That's a big deal, right? Because they actually dug some and there was no water, right? So he called a Sheba. Sheva means also a well. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. It can also be 7, but in this case it's well, right? When Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite. And Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. So now we're getting a little glimpse into Esau's character, right? So the question arises here, why did Isaac not rebuke him or still want to bless him in any way? Why? He's doing everything that he's not supposed to do. And later on we find out that he doesn't even know that he shouldn't be doing this. So we have to point some finger at Isaac here for letting his son off the hook here. Yeah, because Jacob was the one who was pursuing God, not not Esau. So God has a way of leveling the playing field, doesn't he? Esau is the firstborn, but he misses out on all the promises. Right? Because of his heart attitude. All right. Chapter 27. Then it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he said to him, "Here I am." Isaac said, "Behold, now I am old and do not know the way of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me." See, he loves that venison. "And prepare a savory dish for me." I hate this stuff, so I wouldn't eat this for anything. "Such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat." So it appears they connected on this stuff, on hunting and they connected on this kind of food and stuff. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? It was like this is how they bonded, I guess. "So that I may eat it, bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat, and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you.' So she told him, 'Go to the flock and bring me 2 choice goats, and from there, that I may prepare a savory dish for your father, such as he loves.'" So somehow she knew how all the little tricks to make it gamey. I don't know how she did that. Yeah, goat. That's probably because it's a goat. Yeah, they're pretty nasty. "Then you will bring it to your father, that he may eat, and he will bless you before his death." And Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, "Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me. Then I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing." Good point. But his mother said to him, "Your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice, and go, get them for me." So he went and got them. Mama is exerting her authority here. And brought them to his mother. And his mother made savory food, such as his father loved. So we thank God for Rebekah. You know, you read the story and you think this is a really, deceitful thing they're doing here. But I don't see it that way anymore. I know he was deceiving him, but it's God that's taking the blessing away from him because he didn't deserve it. He didn't want it. And Jacob did. Jacob loved the Lord. He wanted the things of God. Right? So it doesn't excuse, bad behavior. But on the other hand, if they hadn't have done this, what would have happened? So in a way, even though Jacob had some stuff to, that wasn't quite right here, but his mother is the one pushing this thing. Right? So we can't fault Jacob. It was his mother's idea. But she sees the prophecy. She knows that Esau is not the one to have the blessing. And I can't fault her. I don't know about you, but her husband is not, seeing what's going on. He's laying there and he can't see very well. He doesn't know his son very well, obviously. He should know enough, right? But this time Mama intervenes. Right? Now, God doesn't rebuke Rebekah or Jacob for this. So today you read about it, and if you go online and look at Jacob's, he's like a deceiver and he's a scumbag. That's what I looked it up. That's all Jacob is, all of those things. I heard that. He's all of those things to the world. And many Christians look at him that way. That is not the way the Bible presents him. There isn't a single negative thing spoken about Jacob or Rebekah in these passages. So it's really wrong to look at it that way. Can God tell them to do it? I believe God told her to do this. And he blessed it. So if God was not with this and this was an evil scheme, then God blessed an evil scheme. So you can't have it either, you can't have it both ways. This was God taking away the blessing from a man who shouldn't have gotten it. Right? And affirming that Jacob was the one he had chosen. All right. So they put the skins on. She dressed Jacob up and sent him in with the food, right, which he had made. And then he came to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "Can you see this?" There he is right there. "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please. Sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me." Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have it so quickly, my son?" He said, "Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come close that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau." So he's got, some doubts here, right? So Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him. But he must have been a hairy dude. Ugh. All right. And he said, "Are you really my son Esau?" And he brought it to him and he ate. And he also brought him wine and he drank. So he's having a really good time here. He's got some good food, right? And he ate and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, "Please come close and kiss me, my son." So it made me know this is a little risky. So he came close and kissed him, and when he smelt the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, "See, the smell of my son. It's like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and an abundance of grain and new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you." Now, see, if he had said that to Esau, it would have gone against the word of God. Why didn't he think about that? But God honored this man's blessing, so he wasn't going to allow him to put it on the wrong person. That's how I view the story. Now, was Jacob deceptive? Yeah, sure. Was Rebekah deceptive? Sure. Absolutely. But I think sometimes radical situations require radical remedies sometimes, right? Doesn't excuse, but it's a small thing, and it's not something that offends God, apparently, in this case. Normally it would. But in this case, no, because of the weight of sin that's on the other end. Does that make sense? And because of the wickedness that's going on here, and God knows what's going to happen. So God's word cannot be broken. Therefore, God has to rearrange this household in order to get his word fulfilled. Okay, I've said that, so there it is. I am not advocating lying or stealing or cheating. Please don't misunderstand. I am not saying that. I'm not saying God wanted them to do that, and that was his perfect plan, but it's very clear that he did enable them to get the blessing, and that was God's plan. Perhaps if she had come up with some other plan, God would have blessed that also, but he apparently blessed this one. Right? Was Jacob blessed? Yes. So God blessed it. Amen? All right. What? He did. I'm not sure if that's Jacob or Esau, but anyway, there he is. He looks kind of different. No, it looks like Jacob. I think it's the wrong picture, but anyway, that's okay. So that's the story, right? And so then along comes Esau. We're going to take time for this. Now it came about when Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had hardly gone out from the presence of Isaac, his father, that Esau, his brother, came in from hunting. Then he also made savory food and brought it to his father, and he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me." And Isaac his father said to him, "Who are you?" He said, "I am your son, your firstborn Esau." Then Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who then was he that hunted game and brought it to me, so that I ate of it all? I ate all of it before you came and blessed him. Yes, and he shall be blessed." And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." And he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken away your blessing." Then he said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright." And behold, no, he didn't take away his birthright. He gave it away. "And behold, now he has taken away my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" But Isaac replied to Esau, "Behold, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants. And with grain and new wine I have sustained him. Now as for you then, what can I do, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father." So Esau lifted his voice and wept. Now see, when it says that even though he wept bitterly, he couldn't find repentance, it doesn't mean that God couldn't forgive him or he didn't forgive him if he truly repented. But it means that he couldn't get the blessing back. Blessing was given. So some decisions, are final. When you make the decision and you do it, there are consequences, right? That's what it means. So then Isaac, spirit of prophecy comes on him again, and he prophesies. I tell you, they really prophesied, these guys. So they knew the Holy Spirit. How else do you explain it? He begins to prophesy. And he says, "Behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it shall come about when you become restless that you will break his yoke from your neck." See? So God's plan was for the older to serve the younger. But Esau didn't want to serve Jacob. He held a grudge against Jacob. And so if he had followed this prophecy again, things would have been better for him. What if he had repented, forgiven Jacob properly, like he tries to but never gets fully there, right? Holds a grudge. Things might have turned out different for him and for his descendants. What was wrong with that anyway, other than pride? You blew it, right? You didn't pursue God when you should have. You lost the blessing. You lost your birth. You gave up your birthright. So why don't you just serve Jacob and, follow God? See? We think that there was no options for Esau. Yes, there was. Serve your brother. Right? But he never does. And Jacob correctly said that when you become restless, you will break his yoke. And that's what he did. He went off and did his own thing. Right? And as a result, his sons were at war with Israel, with the sons of Jacob. So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob. And now when the words of her elder son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent and called her younger son Jacob and said to him, behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself concerning you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise, flee to Haran to my brother Laban. Stay with him for a few days until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides and he forgets what you did to him. Then I will send, and interesting that it's her that planned the whole thing, but anyway, then I will send and get you from there. Why should I be bereaved of you both in one day? Rebekah said to Isaac, I am tired of living. So Rebekah, she loved her Esau also. But Jacob was the pet, so to speak, right? Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm tired of living because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, like these, from the daughters of the land, what good will my life be? So these women that he had married were causing trouble, big trouble for Rebekah and for Isaac. They were grieved by them. They were just obviously not the right people. Okay? Because they weren't godly people. And he shouldn't have married them. But his character was such that he didn't seek the Lord about anything. And he didn't even know. Later on we find out he didn't even realize he wasn't supposed to do that. Yeah. So we're going to stop there.